A young girl, fidgeting and visibly distressed, seemed strangely nervous around the man accompanying her, ostensibly her dad, in the sparsely populated waiting area of the health clinic. Her anxiety was palpable, a silent alarm bell ringing in the quiet space. Later, when the attending physician, Dr. Robert Miller, took a routine X-ray, the image that appeared on the screen was so horrifying, so utterly unexpected, that it compelled him to dial 911 without a moment's hesitation. It was a typically quiet evening settling over the El Camino Community Health Clinic, a small, somewhat dated facility situated just 15 miles from the bustling U.S.-Mexico border. Nestled in a dusty town characterized by the constant, transient flow of migrants and travelers, the clinic itself seemed to reflect its environment. Its faded beige walls, adorned with outdated medical posters whose colors had long since muted, gave the building a weathered, tired appearance. Above, the long tubes of fluorescent lights buzzed with an insistent hum, casting a stark, almost sterile glow across the worn linoleum floors, marked by countless footsteps over the years. The clinic often operated understaffed, especially during the late shifts, relying on a limited roster of dedicated doctors and a handful of hard-working nurses. Tonight was no different. At 9 p.m., Dr. Robert Miller, a seasoned internist with 12 years of invaluable experience specifically in border health care, had just concluded an appointment with a patient. He walked the elderly woman gently toward the clinic's exit, carefully reiterating the final instructions for a medication regimen, ensuring she understood everything clearly. His trusted nurse assistant, Carol Smith, efficiently helped the elderly woman navigate toward the small pharmacy section located near the entrance. Nurse Carol was a pillar of efficiency and possessed a keen observational skill, qualities that made her absolutely invaluable in this frequently understaffed environment. She had worked closely alongside Dr. Miller for 3 years, and over that time, they had cultivated an unspoken understanding, a seamless rhythm to their collaborative work that allowed them to function effectively even under pressure. Dr. Miller briefly glanced toward the waiting room, checking the remaining patient load for his shift. His eyes settled on the only occupants, a father-daughter pair who appeared, based on their tentative demeanor and simple clothing, likely to be immigrants crossing through the area. The father, a man likely in his early 40s, possessed a face etched with hardship and large, calloused hands that currently held a creased newspaper, though he wasn't reading it. His eyes darted nervously, restlessly scanning the room, never settling in one place for more than a fleeting moment. The girl, who looked to be around 12 years old, sat quietly beside him, yet her posture was anything but relaxed. She was hunched over slightly, her thin arms wrapped protectively around her midsection, adopting a defensive stance. Every so often, her young face contorted into a silent grimace, a clear but unspoken signal that she was enduring significant pain. She wore a simple pink t-shirt and matching pants, clothes that hung loosely on her small, frail frame. Deciding to wait for Nurse Carol to complete the administrative check-in, Dr. Miller returned to the relative privacy of the examination room without initially greeting the pair. He settled behind his computer desk, intending to finalize some pending paperwork, the report for the patient he had just seen, while awaiting his nurse assistant. Through the surprisingly thin walls of the clinic, he could hear the muffled, indistinct sounds that formed the background symphony of the facility. The intermittent ringing of phones at the front desk, the constant, laboring hum of the air conditioning system battling valiantly against the oppressive desert heat outside, and the occasional dry cough echoing softly from the waiting area. When Nurse Carol finally arrived, she immediately began sanitizing the examination room, preparing the bed and equipment for the next patient, while simultaneously informing Dr. Miller about the new arrivals. Her movements were practiced and economical as she sprayed disinfectant and meticulously wiped down every surface. "Dr. Miller," she began, speaking quietly and leaning slightly closer to ensure her voice wouldn't carry beyond the confines of the room. "I have a feeling there's something off about the new walk-in pair." She cast a quick, cautious glance toward the closed door before continuing her report. Their new patients never been to this clinic before, according to our records. They don't have any identification with them. She continued wiping down the examination table as she spoke, her actions methodical despite the unease in her voice. The father seems excessively protective of the daughter. He barely lets her speak a word for herself. And the daughter, Nurse Carol paused, her brow furrowing in concern. She looks like she's in considerable pain. When I offered her a simple glass of water earlier, the father sternly refused on her behalf, speaking for her. It was strange. Finishing her task, Nurse Carol disposed of the used wipes and turned to face Dr. Miller directly. Do you still want to accept this patient? Given the circumstances and lack of information, we could potentially refer them elsewhere if you have concerns. Dr. Miller considered her words for a moment, weighing the potential risks against his professional duty. Having grown up in this very area, he was intimately familiar with the often harsh realities and potential dangers surrounding the border, including emergencies unique to this transient population. He understood the dark undercurrents, but remained committed to his personal mission, trying to make a positive difference, one patient at a time. We don't have any other patients waiting right now, Carol, and my shift doesn't end for another 3 hours, he stated, running a hand through his thick black hair as his eyes flickered to the clock on the wall, confirming he still had several hours left before his shift concluded at 11:45 p.m. Besides, he added, his gaze softening slightly, the patient is a child, and it's quite obvious she's experiencing significant pain. I simply can't turn her away. Something deep in his gut, an instinct honed by years of experience, told him this young girl desperately needed help. And as a doctor, he felt ethically bound not to ignore that feeling. He had witnessed too many heartbreaking cases of abuse and exploitation in this border town, and the mere thought of turning away someone potentially in dire need went against the core principles of his profession. Nurse Carol nodded, understanding his decision completely. She completed her sanitation tasks and moved to the door, calling the patients in. Through the small gap, as the door opened, Dr. Miller observed the father's demeanor more closely. The man, who introduced himself as Michael Evans, seemed almost overbearing, never letting the girl, Emily, stray far from his grasp. He constantly clutched her thin wrist and whispered intently to her, while Emily, in turn, kept glancing nervously towards the clinic's exit sign, her eyes wide with an emotion that strongly resembled fear. The father-daughter pair entered the examination room together, Michael Evans's grip on Emily's wrist visibly tightening as they crossed the threshold. Nurse Carol greeted them with a practiced, professional smile that didn't quite reach her observant eyes. "Good evening," she said, gesturing towards the examination space. "I'll need to take your daughter's vital signs first, before Dr. Miller examines her." Before Emily could even attempt a response, Michael Evans, a stocky man with dark, weary eyes that held a guarded look, spoke up gruffly, his accent noticeable. "She just has a simple stomach bug," he stated dismissively. "She just needs something to settle it down. Nothing complicated, you understand." Emily stood silently beside him, looking exceptionally pale, almost ashen. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on her forehead despite the cool air conditioning. Her eyes remained downcast, deliberately avoiding any direct eye contact with either the nurse or the doctor. Her small hands trembled almost imperceptibly as they rested limply at her sides. Nurse Carol maintained her professional composure despite the father's curtness. "I understand, sir, but we still need to follow standard procedure. All patients require a basic vital signs check before being seen by the doctor." Michael Evans looked as though he might raise further objections, but after a tense moment, he gave a curt, reluctant nod, finally releasing the girl's wrist. Nurse Carol gently gestured for Emily to sit on a chair positioned near the vital monitoring equipment. "Emily, I'm just going to check your blood pressure, oxygen levels, and weight." "Okay." The girl offered a nearly imperceptible nod and sat down stiffly as Nurse Carol wrapped the blood pressure cuff around her thin arm. Dr. Miller carefully observed how the girl winced slightly at the cuff's pressure. Michael Evans stood nearby, watching every single movement with a hawk-like intensity that felt unsettling. After completing the measurements, Nurse Carol noted down the numbers on the chart and discreetly delivered it to Dr. Miller. He studied the details quietly. He noted that Emily's blood pressure was slightly elevated, likely due to stress and anxiety, and her oxygen saturation level was hovering at the lower end of the normal range. However, the most concerning finding was her weight, which fell significantly below the 15th percentile for a girl her age, indicating possible malnutrition or a more serious underlying issue. "Emily," Dr. Miller said gently, adopting a calm and reassuring tone, "I'd like to examine you now in the exam space. It will just take a few minutes." Michael Evans immediately stepped forward, his posture defensive. "I'm coming with my daughter." Dr. Miller maintained a calm, yet firm professional tone. "Mr. Evans, you are certainly welcome to stay here in the room, but I need to examine Emily privately for a moment. You can sit right here and wait." He gestured to a chair positioned just a few feet away from the curtained examination area. Michael Evans's jaw tightened visibly, and for a tense second, Dr. Miller thought he might outright refuse. Finally, with obvious reluctance etched on his face, Michael nodded stiffly and sat down, his eyes never leaving his daughter for an instant. Emily hesitantly followed Dr. Miller towards the examination bed, climbing up onto it with visible discomfort. Dr. Miller drew the thin privacy curtain, creating a fragile barrier between them and Michael Evans, although his imposing silhouette was still faintly visible through the fabric. "Lie down, please, Emily," Dr. Miller instructed softly. "I just need to examine your abdomen." The girl complied silently, her eyes wide with apprehension as she lay back on the paper-covered bed. Dr. Miller gently lifted just enough of her pink t-shirt to expose her abdomen. He immediately noted that her skin appeared taut, stretched across her stomach, with a slight but noticeable distension in the upper quadrants. As he began the basic abdominal palpation, gently pressing on different areas, Emily winced sharply and flinched away from his touch, clearly indicating pain. Her stomach felt unusually rigid in certain areas, abnormally so for what her father claimed was a simple stomach bug. When he pressed gently but deliberately on the right upper quadrant, near her liver, she bit her lip hard, stifling a small cry. "Does it hurt right here?" he asked quietly, pressing lightly again near her liver area. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Do you feel bloated, Emily? Like your tummy is too full?" Another whispered, hesitant yes. "How has your appetite been? Have you been eating normally?" She shook her head slightly, a small, negative motion. "What was the last thing you ate, and when was that?" "Water, just water. Yesterday," she murmured, glancing nervously towards the curtain as if terrified her father might overhear her confession. Dr. Miller maintained a neutral, professional expression despite his rapidly growing concern. The girl's fearful behavior was alarming, though not entirely surprising in this context. He had encountered countless young children who were overly controlled by adults, particularly in this volatile border region. It was undeniably a dangerous place to live, and many parents, especially immigrant parents navigating uncertain circumstances, were understandably strict, often driven by necessity and legitimate fear. However, the pronounced abdominal rigidity he felt was deeply concerning. The fact that parts of her stomach felt significantly harder than others strongly suggested a potential obstruction or, more disturbingly, the presence of foreign bodies. He kept his expression carefully neutral and professional as he completed the brief examination, then smoothly opened the privacy curtain again. Michael Evans immediately stood up, his posture radiating tension. "Well, it's just a stomach bug, right? Just give us some medicine so we can finally go." Dr. Miller exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with Nurse Carol before addressing the father directly. "Mr. Evans, during the examination, I found some abnormal abdominal rigidity and also some unexplained pain that concerns me. I need to order an X-ray, just to be safe and rule out anything more serious." Michael Evans's face darkened instantly. "An X-ray? We don't need anything fancy like that. Just give us some medicine." "I cannot do that, Mr. Evans," Dr. Miller stated firmly but calmly. I cannot responsibly prescribe medication without first knowing the definitive source of the pain. X-rays are a routine diagnostic tool used frequently to detect abnormalities inside the digestive tract. He paused, then added another observation. Additionally, Emily appears quite dehydrated. Look at how she's perspiring despite the cool room temperature, and notice her severely chapped lips. He gestured towards Nurse Carol. Could you please bring Emily a cup of water, Carol? Before Nurse Carol could even move to fulfill the request, Michael Evans cut in abruptly, his tone resigned but sharp. Fine. Do the X-ray, whatever. Just do it quickly. When Nurse Carol returned moments later with a cup of water, she gently offered it to Emily. The girl glanced quickly, furtively, at her father, then refused the water in a barely audible whisper, deliberately avoiding eye contact. Dr. Miller handed Michael Evans some standard paperwork detailing the X-ray procedure and consent forms. Please take this down to the radiology section. Nurse Carol will show you the way. Please come back to see me here after the X-ray is completed. He couldn't help but notice that Emily seemed to have difficulty walking. She was slouching noticeably and holding her stomach, clearly still in considerable pain. Carol, Dr. Miller added quickly, let's get Emily a wheelchair. The nurse promptly retrieved one from the hallway, and Emily sat down in it with visible relief washing over her strained features. As Nurse Carol began to push the wheelchair out of the room, Dr. Miller watched Michael Evans's tense posture and the way his eyes continued to dart nervously around the clinic. A heavy sense of foreboding settled over the doctor. Something was profoundly wrong here, and he hoped fervently that the impending X-ray would reveal exactly what it was. While waiting for the X-ray results, Dr. Miller checked if another patient had arrived, but the waiting room remained empty. The small clinic was unusually quiet at this late hour, with only the intermittent cycling sound of the air conditioning system breaking the encompassing silence. Feeling increasingly uneasy about the Evans case, he decided to leave his examination room and walk down the short corridor to the radiology section. The clinic's radiology department was modest, consisting of just one room equipped with basic machinery capable of handling common diagnostic imaging needs. As he approached, he saw Michael Evans waiting restlessly outside the room, pacing back and forth nervously while speaking urgently on his cell phone in hushed, rapid Spanish. The man's face was taut with tension, his free hand clenched tightly into a fist at his side. When Michael spotted Dr. Miller approaching, he abruptly ended his call, his expression instantly hardening into a cold, stern mask. Dr. Miller offered a polite nod. Mr. Evans, it's generally safer to make phone calls a little distance away from the door, he advised gently, pointing further down the corridor. The sensitive equipment can sometimes be affected by cellular signals. Michael Evans narrowed his eyes suspiciously, but moved away as instructed, though he continued to watch Dr. Miller intently. Dr. Miller entered the radiology room, where a technician named Mark was carefully preparing Emily for the scan. The young girl lay perfectly still on the large X-ray table, her face pale and drawn with pain. Mark looked up as Dr. Miller entered. Just about to start, doctor, he confirmed. Dr. Miller nodded and stepped back slightly as Mark expertly positioned the overhead equipment. Emily, I need you to stay completely still for just a moment, okay? Mark instructed clearly through the intercom microphone. The girl nodded slightly, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and pain. The machine hummed powerfully to life, capturing the internal image of Emily's abdomen. As they waited the brief moments for the image to process onto the connected computer, Dr. Miller thought he heard a faint whisper emanating from the table. Please don't take me. The words were incredibly soft, almost indistinguishable over the persistent humming of the X-ray machine. Mark glanced sideways at Dr. Miller, his brow furrowed in confusion. He clearly hadn't been sure what the girl meant, and her voice was far too low to clearly make out the words against the background noise. Emily, we need you to stay very still now, Mark repeated into the microphone. We might need to retake the image if there was movement. After the second attempt, the digital X-ray image appeared clearly on the computer screen. Both Dr. Miller and Mark leaned forward simultaneously, their expressions instantly shifting from professional neutrality to undisguised shock and horror. The X-ray revealed dozens upon dozens of distinct, oval, dense shapes scattered throughout Emily's entire gastrointestinal tract. These foreign bodies were strikingly uniform in size and density, clearly not something natural or belonging within her anatomy. Dr. Miller immediately recognized the horrifying truth of what they were seeing: drug pellets. Someone, most likely the man claiming to be her father, had forced this young child to swallow numerous packages of illegal drugs, presumably for smuggling purposes. "Mark, send the digital copy to my computer immediately," Dr. Miller ordered urgently, keeping his voice low and steady despite the turmoil inside him. Mark nodded, his face grim as he quickly initiated the file transfer. Dr. Miller exited the radiology room, passing Michael Evans, who was still pacing and back on his phone, now speaking even more urgently in Spanish. Their eyes met briefly, and Dr. Miller forced himself to maintain a neutral, impassive expression despite the potent mixture of rage and disgust boiling within him. He returned quickly to the sanctuary of his office and checked his email for the X-ray files. Opening them on his computer screen, he examined the images in minute detail. There were at least 36 drug pellets, clearly visible, distributed throughout Emily's stomach and intestines. Most concerning, however, was the unmistakable sign that one of the pellets, located high in her digestive tract, appeared to be leaking, which would perfectly explain the girl's escalating pain and the critical danger she was now in. If that package had already ruptured or were to rupture completely, she could rapidly experience a potentially fatal drug overdose. Dr. Miller quickly searched online medical databases, confirming what his experience already strongly suggested. The X-ray images perfectly matched documented cases of body packing, the extremely dangerous practice of swallowing sealed packages containing illegal drugs for clandestine smuggling. Most documented cases involved adults, but there were horrifying, albeit rarer, instances of children being cruelly used as drug mules, primarily because they typically attracted less suspicion from authorities. Leaning back heavily in his chair, Dr. Miller pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a sickening wave of helpless anger wash over him. Emily was being brutally exploited, her young life deliberately endangered solely for the purpose of drug trafficking. The sickening realization hit him. Michael Evans was probably not her father at all, but rather a ruthless handler using her as a disposable vessel to smuggle drugs across the border. He glanced furtively through the small window embedded in his office door and noticed that Michael and Emily had not yet returned from the radiology department. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to intervene. He picked up the phone receiver and dialed 911, keeping his voice deliberately low but filled with urgency. "This is Dr. Robert Miller at the El Camino Community Health Clinic. I have a child patient here, approximately 12 years old, who has been forced to ingest multiple drug packages for smuggling purposes. Critically, one package appears to be actively leaking. I need police assistance and immediate medical transport." The handler, posing as her father, is still in the building. He quickly provided a detailed physical description of Michael Evans and Emily, emphasizing the grave and immediate danger to the child's life if the leaking drug package fully ruptured. "Please hurry," he added, his voice strained. "I believe they may attempt to leave the premises as soon as they realize I've discovered the drugs." As he hung up the phone, Dr. Miller steeled himself for the potentially dangerous confrontation that might follow. His absolute priority now was keeping Emily safe and ensuring she received the emergency medical care she desperately needed before the leaking drug package tragically claimed her life. After the critical phone call, Dr. Miller quickly walked out of his office and back into the main corridor, intending to check if Michael Evans and Emily had returned from radiology yet. He was slightly surprised to see that another patient, an elderly man leaning heavily on a cane, had arrived in the meantime and was now sitting in the otherwise empty waiting room. The clinic's night receptionist was patiently helping him fill out the necessary intake forms. Dr. Miller knew, however, that he needed to prioritize the urgent and dangerous situation involving Emily. He approached the patient administration desk, located near the nurse's station, to discreetly inform the on-duty staff of the unfolding crisis. Several nurses, quickly sensing from his demeanor that something serious was wrong, began to gather around as he spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "I've called 911, he explained quickly to the head nurse. "We have a child patient who's been forced to swallow drug packages. One of them appears to be leaking. Police are en route, but we need to be extremely careful not to alarm the handler before they arrive." The nurses exchanged worried, concerned glances, their expressions reflecting a mixture of profound shock and immediate determination. Just as Dr. Miller was explaining the critical need for emergency medical intervention for Emily, he noticed movement from the corner of his eye. Michael Evans and Emily were walking past the administration desk, being escorted back by Nurse Carol. Michael Evans's eyes narrowed suspiciously as he observed the group of staff members huddled together in serious conversation. Their concerned faces inadvertently turned in his direction. Emily, looking even paler and more fragile than before, kept her gaze firmly fixed on the floor tiles. Nurse Carol, blissfully unaware of the horrific discovery Dr. Miller had made from the X-ray, offered a polite smile. "The X-ray is complete. I told them they could wait in the waiting area while the images are reviewed by you, Doctor." Dr. Miller nodded, forcing himself to appear casual. "Thank you, Carol. I'll be with him shortly." As Nurse Carol started to lead Michael Evans and Emily towards the designated waiting area, Dr. Miller quickly pulled her aside and whispered the grim situation to her. Her eyes widened in shock, and she couldn't entirely suppress an involuntary gasp or slight change in expression as she glanced back towards Michael Evans. It was subtle, but it was enough. Michael Evans, already highly suspicious and on edge, noticed the brief, urgent exchange and Carol's reaction. His posture changed instantly, shifting from merely tense to fully alert, his eyes darting rapidly between Dr. Miller, the assembled nurses, and the clinic's various exits. In one sudden, swift motion, Michael Evans grabbed Emily's arm roughly, yanking her forcefully toward the near side exit door. The elderly patient, still waiting patiently in the main area, shouted out in alarm, "Hey, what are you doing to that child? Stop them!" Dr. Miller yelled, immediately breaking into a run after them. Two male nurses quickly joined the pursuit, but Michael Evans, fueled by adrenaline and desperation, was surprisingly fast. He shoved forcefully through the side door, practically dragging the stumbling Emily, who cried out in pain and fear. By the time Dr. Miller and the nurses reached the dimly lit parking lot outside, Michael Evans had already forced Emily into a waiting car. The vehicle immediately screeched away, tires spitting gravel as it sped off into the night. "Did anyone manage to get the license plate number?" Dr. Miller asked desperately, breathing heavily from the chase. From the chaos and the dim parking lot lighting, no one had been able to get a clear view. Just 5 minutes later, the flashing blue and red lights of police cruisers illuminated the clinic's parking lot as they pulled in swiftly. Officer Roy Carter, a veteran Border Patrol officer whose face showed the weariness of having seen too many similar tragic cases, took Dr. Miller's statement with a grim, resigned expression. "We'll put out an alert immediately," Officer Carter stated after examining the printed copy of the horrifying X-ray Dr. Miller provided. But without any form of ID or a clear photograph, finding them is going to be extremely difficult. "That girl is in immediate, critical danger," Dr. Miller insisted urgently, pointing again to the X-ray image showing the leaking pellet. "One of the pellets has clearly ruptured or is leaking significantly. She's likely actively overdosing as a higher dosage of potent drugs enters her system. She needs emergency medical care now." Officer Carter's expression darkened further. "Doctor, I understand your concern completely, but you need to understand the reality of what we're dealing with here. These children, they're often treated as disposable couriers by the cartels. They use them precisely because even if they are caught, they typically face minimal legal consequences as minors. And if something goes wrong medically..." He didn't finish the grim sentence, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. "So we just give up?" Dr. Miller asked, incredulous and appalled. Our resources are stretched incredibly thin, Officer Carter explained bluntly. No ID, no verifiable name. It's essentially a dead end investigationally from the start. We will alert all border checkpoints with the descriptions you've provided, but these people, they know exactly how to disappear without a trace. Dr. Miller felt a surge of profound frustration and anger. This clinic might stand on dangerous ground near the border, but that doesn't mean we're supposed to just give up on kids, he said sharply, his voice laced with emotion. He proceeded to provide the most detailed physical descriptions he could recall of both Michael Evans and Emily. Their approximate height and weight, the clothing they wore, eye color, hair color. Anything, however small, that might potentially help identify them. Any distinguishing features you notice? Officer Carter pressed. Scars, tattoos, birthmarks? Dr. Miller and Nurse Carol looked at each other, searching their memories, then shook their heads regretfully. Nothing obvious that we recall, Nurse Carol replied softly. Officer Carter sighed deeply. We'll certainly try, Doctor. But you should know, these kinds of tragic cases happen almost daily around the border regions. Children being used as drug mules, victims of human trafficking. We have severely limited resources, and the harsh reality is we simply can't save everyone. Dr. Miller watched helplessly as the police team eventually departed from the clinic, leaving behind a heavy silence. The brutal reality of border health care, the immense suffering and the limitations of intervention weighed heavily upon him. The most likely, heartbreaking outcome was that Emily would never receive the critical medical care she so desperately needed. The haunting thought of her suffering, possibly dying alone from a drug overdose, simply because she had been ruthlessly exploited by traffickers, filled him with a cold, consuming rage. He and Nurse Carol returned to the now empty examination room in somber silence. The elderly patient was still waiting patiently. They had no choice but to compartmentalize their distress and continue with their work. Though the image of Emily's terrified, pain-filled face remained etched vividly in Dr. Miller's mind as he forced himself to refocus his attention on his next patient. The next hour passed as normally as possible under the deeply disturbing circumstances. Dr. Miller attended to the elderly man, diagnosing a kidney infection, prescribing the necessary antibiotics, and providing care instructions. He then saw 2 more walk-in patients presenting with relatively minor ailments. Yet, throughout these consultations, his mind kept relentlessly returning to Emily, to the shocking X-ray image revealing dozens of deadly drug pellets packed inside her small, fragile body. At precisely 11:45 p.m., the clinic officially closed for the night. The remaining nurses filed out one by one, bidding a tired good night to Dr. Miller. Nurse Carol lingered for a moment longer, placing a comforting, sympathetic hand briefly on his shoulder. You did everything you possibly could, Doctor, she said quietly, her voice filled with empathy. Try not to blame yourself for what happened. Dr. Miller managed a weak nod, though her well-intentioned reassurance did little to ease the heavy weight on his conscience. Good night, Carol. Drive safely. After everyone else had departed, Dr. Miller stayed behind, ostensibly to finish up remaining paperwork. But in reality, he found himself compulsively reviewing medical literature on body packing cases online. He found numerous disturbing case studies detailing the horrific outcomes for drug couriers suffering from acute toxicity when ingested packages ruptured. The mortality rates were disturbingly high, even for adult carriers. For a child of Emily's small size and weight, the prognosis would be even more dire. 15 minutes passed as he scrolled through the grim statistics and case reports. Finally, letting out a heavy sigh laden with frustration and helplessness, he decided it was truly time to go home. He gathered his belongings, methodically switched off the clinic lights, and securely locked the doors behind him. The parking lot was nearly empty now, his own car sitting isolated under the lonely, flickering glow of a single lamppost. As Dr. Miller approached his vehicle, the hairs on the back of his neck suddenly stood on end. An inexplicable feeling of being watched, a primal sense of wrongness, washed over him. He quickened his pace slightly, instinctively reaching for his car keys in his pocket. Suddenly, From the deep shadows behind him, someone approached rapidly in a quick, determined stride. Before Dr. Miller could even fully turn around, he felt the unmistakable cold, hard metal of a gun barrel pressing firmly against his back. "Don't move," a familiar, harsh voice growled menacingly. It was Michael Evans. "Examine my daughter and help her. Now." "Michael!" Dr. Miller instinctively raised his hand slowly, carefully dropping his work bag onto the rough asphalt. "If you shout, I'll shoot immediately," Michael Evans warned, his voice dangerously low. Dr. Miller risked a quick glance back and saw Michael's finger resting tensely on the trigger. "I've already pulled the trigger halfway." "Where is she?" Dr. Miller asked, his years of medical training kicking in, overriding his immediate fear with the instinct to assess the situation. "By the clinic side door. Slowly turn back toward the clinic and walk. No sudden movements." With his hands still held high in a gesture of compliance, Dr. Miller walked carefully, deliberately, back towards the clinic building. As they rounded the corner to the side entrance, he saw Emily. She was lying motionless on the ground near the door. Her condition had deteriorated dramatically in the few hours since they had fled the clinic. Her skin now had a distinct bluish tinge, a clear sign of cyanosis due to lack of oxygen, and a small amount of white foam had gathered at the corners of her mouth. She was barely conscious, her breathing terrifyingly shallow and irregular. "Fix her," Michael Evans demanded again, the gun still trained unwaveringly on Dr. Miller. "I will," Dr. Miller replied, his doctor's instincts fully taking over now. "But I need you to lower the gun. I can't properly help her with you pointing that weapon at me." Michael Evans's hand trembled slightly, betraying his own fear and desperation. "How do I know you won't just call the police again the second I lower it?" "Listen to me carefully," Dr. Miller explained, keeping his voice as calm and steady as possible despite his heart pounding against his ribs. "One of those pellets inside her body has ruptured, and your daughter is actively overdosing because the drugs are flooding her system. Every single minute counts right now. You can keep the gun if you must, but please let me work. You don't want to live with the regret if you prevent me from saving her." After a moment of tense hesitation, weighing his options, Michael Evans slowly lowered the weapon, though he kept it clutched tightly in his hand. "Save her," he choked out, and for the very first time, Dr. Miller heard genuine, raw fear palpable in the man's voice. Dr. Miller quickly used his key card to unlock the clinic side door and then carefully, gently lifted Emily into his arms. Her small body felt frighteningly light as he carried her inside. He brought her directly to the emergency treatment room and gently laid her down on the examination bed. Working swiftly and efficiently, he gathered the necessary supplies for emergency gastric decontamination. He immediately started in 4-line to aggressively address her severe dehydration and began preparations for a whole bowel irrigation procedure, designed to flush the toxic substances rapidly from her system. The girl remained semi-conscious, occasionally letting out soft moans of pain. "I need to sedate her lightly for this procedure," Dr. Miller explained briefly as he worked, his focus absolute. "It will make her more comfortable and allow me to work more efficiently without causing further distress." Michael Evans hovered nearby, a silent, menacing presence, the gun now tucked into his waistband but still prominently visible as a constant threat. After administering a mild sedative, Dr. Miller began the intensive irrigation process, continuously watching Emily's vital signs closely on the monitor he had quickly hooked up. "This procedure will help flush her system temporarily," he explained calmly to Michael Evans, glancing up briefly. "But she urgently needs surgery to remove all the other packages. There are simply too many inside her, and any one of them could rupture at any given time. I don't have the specialized equipment here at the clinic to perform that kind of complex surgery safely." Michael Evans's face hardened again, his brief vulnerability vanishing. "No hospital. She will almost certainly die without proper surgical intervention," Dr. Miller insisted, meeting the man's gaze directly. "I need to call EMS right now for immediate transport. She needs a specialized surgical team and intensive care." Michael Evans pulled the gun out again, pointing it directly at Dr. Miller. No hospital. You fix her here. Dr. Miller fought hard to remain calm, to keep his voice steady. I physically cannot fix her here, Michael. There are absolutely no tools or facilities for this kind of major procedure in this clinic, and your daughter will die if we don't get her to a proper hospital immediately. He paused, thinking rapidly under duress, then added desperately, but I have a friend. He's a veterinarian. He has a clinic not far from here, and he possesses surgical equipment. Michael Evans's eyes narrowed with deep suspicion. A vet? You want to take my daughter to an animal doctor? He has the sterile environment and the surgical tools I would need for this specific removal procedure, Dr. Miller insisted, improvising rapidly. It's truly her only chance outside of hospital, which you won't allow. Michael seemed to waver, his gaze shifting to Emily, who coughed weakly, more foam appearing at her lips. Finally, after an agonizing moment, he nodded curtly. Fine, but if this is some kind of trick. It's not a trick, Dr. Miller assured him quickly. I need to make a phone call to my friend right now to arrange it. You can watch your daughter closely while I do that. I'm coming with you, Michael Evans insisted, unwilling to let him out of his sight. Dr. Miller shook his head firmly. You need to trust me, just for this, if this is going to work. Stay with her. Monitor her breathing carefully. Call out to me immediately if anything changes. After another tense moment, Michael Evans reluctantly agreed, choosing to stay by his daughter's side. Dr. Miller left the room and hurried down the corridor to the administration desk area. Instead of calling any veterinarian friend, a desperate fabrication, he immediately dialed 911 again for an ambulance. This is Dr. Robert Miller at the El Camino Clinic. I need immediate emergency transport for a pediatric patient experiencing complications from a ruptured. He was about to provide more critical details and attempt to use a prearranged code word to signal a hostage situation, requesting police backup discreetly, when he felt the chillingly familiar cold metal of the gun barrel pressed hard against the back of his head once more. Michael Evans had followed him after all. Cancel the call. Now, Michael ordered, his voice deadly quiet as he released the safety on the gun with an audible, ominous click. Dr. Miller's heart sank as he spoke woodenly into the phone. I'm sorry. This was a mistake. Please cancel the request. He hung up slowly, knowing he had just lost his best chance to save both Emily and potentially himself. Michael Evans forcefully marched Dr. Miller back to the treatment room, where Emily lay still, unconscious from the sedative, but, thankfully, breathing slightly more regularly now due to the emergency irrigation treatment. The procedure had temporarily helped stabilize her, but Dr. Miller knew with chilling certainty it was only buying precious, limited time. Sit down, Michael ordered curtly, gesturing towards a nearby chair with the gun. Dr. Miller complied, watching helplessly as Michael quickly tied his hands tightly behind his back using a length of gauze bandage he ripped unceremoniously from a nearby supply shelf. Once Dr. Miller was securely bound, Michael stepped back, keeping the gun pointed steadily in his direction while he pulled out his own phone and made another call. He spoke rapidly in Spanish, his tone urgent and occasionally pleading. Dr. Miller, who understood Spanish fluently from his years working near the border, listened carefully, piecing together Michael's side of the desperate conversation. Yes, complications. The package broke. She needs help. No, a doctor discovered it. Yes, I have him. El Camino Clinic. 20 minutes. We'll be waiting. After ending the call, Michael turned back to Dr. Miller, his expression dark and foreboding. You've made things very, very bad. For both of us. What do you mean? Dr. Miller asked, subtly testing the tightness of the bandage restraints. I've called for transport, Michael explained grimly. They'll take us to the facility. Someone there will operate on my daughter. But they won't be kind, not to either one of us now. Dr. Miller felt a cold chill run through him despite the room's temperature. Why not just take her directly to your facility in the first place? Why even come here to the clinic? Michael's jaw tightened, a flicker of anguish crossing his face before hardening again. That's the thing. You've complicated things, disappointed people. I'll deal with you later. He began pacing nervously, glancing repeatedly at Emily's still form. Those men, They shouldn't know that my daughter failed to deliver the packages successfully. If they knew she's incapable of being a reliable body packer, they would just kill her. He stopped pacing abruptly and looked directly at Dr. Miller, his expression a complex mixture of raw anger and palpable fear. She means nothing to them, doctor, but she means everything, everything to me. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. Because of you and your discovery, your incompetence, now they will know. And they will kill her. And they will probably kill you too. Dr. Miller felt confusion mingling with his fear. If you love her so much, why let her do this in the first place? Why deliberately put her life at such terrible risk? Michael maintained his stern, dangerous facade, clearly fighting not to appear weak, the gun still held firmly trained on the doctor. I don't need to explain my life or my choices to you. Despite Michael's attempt to remain the intimidating captor, Dr. Miller sensed there was a deeper, more complex story unfolding. It seemed increasingly likely that Michael Evans himself was also being coerced or forced to work for the higher-ups within this ruthless drug operation, tragically compelled to use his own daughter as a mule. Their tense exchange was abruptly interrupted by the distinct sound of a vehicle pulling into the clinic parking lot outside. Michael tensed immediately, quickly peering through the window blinds. "They're here," he announced grimly. "Don't try anything stupid." Michael cautiously checked the corridor outside the room, then returned quickly to untie Dr. Miller, keeping the gun pressed firmly against his ribs the entire time. "Walk slowly ahead of me. Say nothing." For men, dressed entirely in black tactical clothing with their faces obscured by masks, entered silently through the side door, moving with practiced, chilling efficiency. Two of them immediately went directly to Emily, expertly disconnecting her from the vital signs monitor and carefully transferring her small body onto a portable stretcher they had brought with them. From their precise, economical movements, Dr. Miller could tell they possessed significant medical training. They quickly checked her airway and secured her properly onto the stretcher before starting to wheel her towards the exit. As they moved Emily out, a large, heavily muscled man approached Dr. Miller and Michael Evans. Without uttering a single word, he roughly grabbed Dr. Miller's arm and forcefully led him outside to where two vehicles were waiting, a nondescript van, where they were currently loading Emily on the stretcher, and a large black SUV with heavily tinted windows. "Get in," the large man ordered curtly, shoving Dr. Miller hard towards the waiting SUV. As he climbed awkwardly into the back seat, Michael Evans followed closely behind, still clutching his gun. The large man then handed Michael a rough burlap sack. "For him," he grunted, nodding towards Dr. Miller. Michael quickly pulled the suffocating sack over Dr. Miller's head, plunging him into complete, disorienting darkness just as the vehicle began to move. Through the rough fabric, Dr. Miller could hear the engine roar as they accelerated rapidly away from the clinic and into the terrifying unknown. The next time Dr. Miller saw light was when the burlap sack was roughly pulled off his head. He blinked rapidly, his eyes struggling to adjust to the sudden, harsh brightness. He found himself sitting bound securely to a cold metal chair positioned in the corner of a large, sterile room that looked like the inside of an industrial warehouse. His unfamiliar surroundings came into focus gradually. Bare concrete floors, cold metal walls, and stark overhead fluorescent lighting that cast an unnerving, clinical bluish tint over everything. At the center of this room stood a modern surgical table, fully equipped with an array of sophisticated medical instruments. Three individuals, completely clad in black surgical scrubs and medical masks that concealed their faces entirely, moved around the table with practiced, silent efficiency. They all wore gloves and worked in an eerie, unnerving silence, communicating only through subtle, practiced hand gestures and brief nods. On the table lay Emily, now deeply unconscious, likely from administered general anesthesia. A large monitor position nearby displayed a real-time internal view of the ongoing operation, likely an endoscopic feed. Dr. Miller, with his extensive medical training, could clearly see they were performing a complex gastric extraction procedure, meticulously removing the drug pellets. The lead surgeon worked with remarkable skill and precision, making careful incisions and delicately removing the oval packages one by one. No one spoke a single word, not even the standard surgical procedure announcements or instrument counts that would be absolutely mandatory in any legitimate operating room environment. The team's perfect, silent coordination strongly suggested they had performed this exact procedure many times before. This clearly wasn't their first illegal extraction, and tragically, Emily wasn't their first child victim. Dr. Miller turned his head cautiously and noticed two large observation windows set into one wall of the room. Through the thick glass, he could see two men intently watching the procedure. One was Michael Evans, his face a tight mask of palpable tension as he observed his daughter's precarious surgery. The other watcher was an older man, dressed impeccably in an expensive suit, calmly smoking a cigar despite the sterile medical setting. His face remained impassive, cold, as he watched the operation unfold with the detached air of someone merely monitoring a routine business transaction. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only around 45 minutes, the surgical team completed the extraction. All the drug packages had been successfully removed from Emily's system, and the surgical wound was closed with practiced efficiency and speed. The team carefully moved her from the operating table to a waiting stretcher and immediately wheeled her out of the surgery room, leaving Dr. Miller alone once more with his terrifying thoughts and uncertain fate. Moments later, one of the masked nurses returned. Without speaking, she approached him, untied his bonds, and then simply pointed toward the door at the side of the room. "Clean up," she finally said, her voice muffled and indistinct behind the mask. "Shower room is through there. Change into this." She handed him a folded set of black surgical scrubs, identical to the ones the surgical team had been wearing. What are you going to do with me now?" Dr. Miller asked, rubbing his raw wrists where the tight ropes had cut painfully into his skin. The nurse didn't answer, but the palpable tension in her rigid posture was clear. Before she could leave, the main door opened again, and one of the men who had been watching the surgery from behind the glass entered the room. He was tall and imposing, with a shaved head and a jagged scar running prominently from his left eye down to his jawline. "You're too deeply involved now, and you are a doctor," the scarred man stated, his voice surprisingly refined, almost cultured, which contrasted sharply with his intimidating appearance. "You now have two options." He began walking slowly around Dr. Miller, assessing him with cold, calculating eyes. "Option 1. Get yourself cleaned up, put on the scrubs, and follow whatever instructions we give you." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "We checked your professional profile before bringing you here. You were once a practicing surgeon before settling into work as an internist. We can make very good use of those particular skills." Dr. Miller's stomach churned violently at the horrifying implication of being forced to perform illegal surgeries. "And option 2? Dr. Miller asked, his voice strained. "Option 2 is you refuse, and then we'll simply have to end your life, doctor," the man replied simply, chillingly. "I will never work for you," Dr. Miller stated firmly, finding a reserve of courage. "I would rather die." The scar man chuckled, a cold, humorless sound. "Who said anything about dying?" At that precise moment, the door opened yet again, and another menacing man entered, roughly pushing a young boy, maybe 10 years old, into the room ahead of him. The child's eyes were wide with sheer terror, his small body trembling uncontrollably. "Option 1, the scarred man continued smoothly, gesturing toward the terrified boy. "You and our lead surgeon will move those packages." He gestured towards the sterile container holding the pellets just removed from Emily, that were just removed from the girl's body, into this boy's digestive tract. "For his delivery." He paused again for effect. "Option 2, we surgically move those same packages into your body instead, and you'll then work for us as a mule." His smile turned cruel, predatory. "Don't underestimate how effectively we can manage to subdue people. It's not only children who work for us, doctor. Some of our very best couriers are respected professionals, just like yourself. People with clean records who attract minimal suspicion. Dr. Miller stared in horror at the frightened boy, feeling physically sickened by the barbaric choice presented to him. He couldn't possibly operate on an innocent child, forcing drug packages into his body. It violated every single principle he had sworn to uphold when he took the Hippocratic Oath. But the alternative, becoming a drug mule himself, would mean almost certain death if any of those packages ruptured during transit. He glanced around the room desperately, searching for any possible escape. There were no windows except for the heavily guarded observation ones, and no visible exits apart from the main door, which was undoubtedly guarded. He had no personal belongings, no phone to call for help, and absolutely no idea where he was being held. You should probably clean yourself up and put on the scrubs regardless of which side of the operating table you eventually end up on, the scarred man said with a final, chilling smirk. You have exactly 5 minutes to decide. Dr. Miller numbly took the offered black medical scrubs and followed the silent nurse towards the designated change room. As he passed the terrified young boy, their eyes met briefly. The raw, pure fear he saw reflected in the child's eyes solidified his resolve instantly. He could never, under any circumstances, become a part of this monstrous operation. The change room was small and basic, containing only a simple shower stall, a sink, and a narrow bench. After the door closed securely behind him, Dr. Miller leaned heavily against the cool wall, his mind racing frantically. This was not a normal hostage situation. This was something far more sinister and organized. He needed to think beyond his medical training to find a way out. He quickly washed his hands and face, splashed cold water on his neck, changed into the black scrubs as instructed, and made his decision. Whatever happened next, he would absolutely not become complicit in their barbaric operation. He would find a way, somehow, to save that boy, to save Emily, and to save himself. Or he would die trying. Dr.